Welcome. So the last video, it says it's not available. I don't know why exactly. It could be the copyright violation. It could be the literally showing the apparatus for leaf drawn concentrate being utilized in frame. Maybe that's it. But the videos are not monetized. They're marked as not for kids. So I don't really see what the issue would have been, but I will continue to keep it off the screen as well as leave the music to lo-fi study channels, because maybe that'll just be like the best way to avoid any kind of like issues moving forward. Today, got up this morning, went to the gym, focused on cardio, shadowboxing, bag work. It was great. Wanted to achieve some sort of like reclamation of fortitude. Instead, just had a nice sweaty time. It was good times. And now I'm here. Gonna be continuing with politics of culture in the shadow of capital. And then I have a PDF copy of John Rieder's Readers. I think it's Colonialism and the Emergence of Science Fiction, it's called. And I might move back and forth. There's a bunch of other really interesting like miscellaneous readings that I've found, other dissertations on the topic, other writings that I like, other random articles and stuff, not on the topic like the one that I'm doing, but other like ones that have popped up in my search bar. And within them, it contains like a bunch of, a lot of these contain like sometimes cross-referencing recent dissertation bibliographies is very useful for like finding what are the kind of key texts that a lot of people are engaging with that kind of overlap. And that could be useful for my considerations as well. Yeah, this should be cool. Okay, so let me go ahead and get my timer started. And that's 25 minutes on the thing. All right. Okay, 25 minutes. Let's go ahead and get started. Oh no, are you not in there? Oh, that's why. Because I need to plug this into this and then plug this into my computer. And now oh no. Technical difficulties. Wonder why. What's happening there? I wonder why it's doing that. That's weird. Usually it turns on immediately when I put on the OBS, but I don't know. I wonder why it's not working. Let me try to figure this out, I guess, again. God dang it. It's so frustrating. Little things all the time. I gotta make sure I have my... Oh no, not that. Okay, go there. Let's try this again. Existing, create new. Okay, there we go. Okay, we're in there. Hopefully this doesn't do this stupid thing where it blacks out like last time. I don't know. It's frustrating, but that's okay. We persevere. All right, cool. Tuh. What the fuck is this about? This is so weird. This is one of the very interesting ones. It's mainly dealing with medicine, vaccinations in the Philippines in the early 1900s. Eerie. 5 minutes. All right, let's talk about this essay. I'm reading this essay right now by Reinaldo C. Ileto. It's called Nonlinear Philippine History, Outlines of a Nonlinear Emplotment of Philippine History. It's talking, oh man, it's really interesting. It's talking about, it's like a medical humanities kind of look. It's talking about the outbreak of cholera, like a cholera epidemic that occurred in, okay, well, first it's talking about the idea of linear history. The first thing that's coming up is that the very notion of like Filipino constructions of history as per Teodoro Agnosillo, they follow categories and chronological sequences that are kind of established by in a way that follows archetypal movement, same as their Spanish colonizers: Golden Age, the Fall, the Dark Age, economic and social development, rise of nationalist consciousness, the birth of the nation, and either suppressed nationalism or democratic tutelage. So there's this idea of a linear history that's occurring, and the idea that, you know, the native intelligentsia, the consequent rise of like a native intelligentsia, educated members of the indigenous population developing an idea of nationalism that will coalesce the identity of the colonized against their colonizers. And it's talking about these native intelligentsia and Filipino culture. That ilustrado is the term that Ileto uses, talking about how these, what are they doing again? What was the line he said? Basically the way that they kind of both him, this person, who was it? What's her name again? Angosillo, and then Ferdinand Marcos differentiates that against Marcos's history, against Angosillo's history, saying Marcos's history takes a more positive view of the fall of the Dark Age, or the Dark Age. But here, there's also this, this notion of development. Marcos's history says develops a counter society, talks about a counter society in the process of revealing itself, making liberty manifest, gradually transforming itself into a state, which actually follows the Hegelian, like, Enlightenment ideas of the state as the absolute instantiation of like individual and collective freedom. But this is weird because the intelligentsia produces this sense of history so that they can purportedly raise the masses to a level of articulated nationalism, but it's very Spanish, very Enlightenment, and also very Christian, because it draws upon the Filipino common sense, quote unquote, view that colonialism made the masses passive. The Spanish clergy preach virtues such as resignation, passivity, and respect for authority. Colonialism bad, peasants, anything they get out of colonialism bad, anything they had pre-colonialism is the thing that needs to be rescued and then reified into the national state. But it doesn't talk about how, what people want is not necessarily what this native intelligentsia wants, because the intelligentsia of an indigenous population are the people who are basically the closest to transference between Western and between the colonized and the colonizer culture. And it's interesting because they do have a lot to offer, but they do so by kind of silencing the voices of people in a way that treats the masses like they don't know what they want. And this gets really interesting because it starts linking this to this discussion of the state apparatus, specifically to physicians and cholera outbreak in the late 1800s and early 1900s, talking about how where was it? So first it was, Spanish health officials were in touch with physicians from British India, and they were, they were trying to battle this killer disease. Let's see. Talk about the text a little bit more, and then we'll move in. But it was talking about how like the nascent Illustrado began to assert itself in the name of scientific medicine. So you'd have to get, frequent appeal to Manila will send a medico titular at once. A medico titular is a bona fide graduate of a medical course, a physician, variously called medico or licenciado. So the native physician becomes a powerful figure in towns that have one, and due to their scarcity, they have to be rotated. And the ones who had to do without one relied on the vaccinator, who had been around since the beginning of the century, and the mediquillo, anybody who has a smattering of formal training. There was no strict line separating the mediquillo from the curandero, the Spanish name for herbalist or healer aided by spiritual powers. But the vaccinator, along with the mediquillo and the curandero, they get relegated to like the realm of unlicensed medical practitioner, and the only licensed medical practitioners become the people who come from these bona fide programs. And then the physicians are against the Spanish friar, or kind of like pit against the Spanish friars, who, they have handbooks that encapsulate missionary experience with tropical disease. They assumed the role of doctors in Pueblo centers. They led local sanitary commissions. And when the medico came, the clerical dominance began to decline, which you'd think, like, good. Doctors good, church bad, right? But what ends up happening is that the rise of scientific medicine creates these issues where the delegitimation of the activities of indigenous practitioners, which is interestingly the vaccinator is among them. In keeping order and enforcing public health measures, local police tried to prevent access to curers. Very interesting. And it says here that the cholera epidemic began to subside not so much as the result of action by local sanitary commissions, but just the aftermath of powerful storms that washed out sources of infection, and the onset of natural immunity among the population as also a factor. So they're talking about how like the state intervention did very little to actually help the situation when it was the colonized state, but also the nascent Filipino medical practitioners were also part of the issue. And this kind of continues with American occupation. When it's talking about in 1902, when the disease appears in Manila, it provoked a massive medical quarantine sanitation effort on the part of the newly installed colonial government. And talks a lot about how these officers, a lot of people resisted. People resisted the medical quarantine and sanitation efforts by burning infected houses, burying in mass graves, and attempting cremations, and applying unfamiliar treatments and solutions, to name a few, which were met with flight concealment and a general sullenness of people in some areas. The segregation of infected persons in cholera hospitals was particularly resisted. Quarantine measures were broken whenever possible. Curanderos were secretly active, attracting villagers to their mountain redoubts. That's crazy. So the objective presence of a killer disease was justification enough for colonial policies to be pushed through by force if necessary. The image of the conquering soldier became quickly transformed into that of the crusading sanitation inspector. I'm not going to draw parallels here between what's happening in this particular situation in the Philippines and what I don't think direct parallels can be drawn necessarily between that and what we've experienced in the last 4 years with COVID. But I do think that this is just really interesting to think about, that the colonial powers are clearly not doing a great job, but the nascent intelligentsia of the population of the colonized does not necessarily assist either. And yet, there are forces, remnants, that exist of colonization, like the Spanish friars, that interact with people like the curanderos, or interacted with people like the curanderos, to produce a more, what Ileto kind of calls a the Filipino medico as opposed to the Manila trained physicians. What do they say here? They make a distinction here between between the Manila licensed Filipino. What did they say? They make a distinction here between physicians of different types. One of them being conflict between Filipino Spanish physicians and their U.S. counterparts. So I think what's being talked about here was physicians, American physicians, and then they're talking about a Filipino educated one as well. So then at some point in here, there's like a switch over where Leto is talking about how there's a conflict between Filipino Spanish physicians and their U.S. counterparts because the Filipino and Spanish physicians, they promised to aid the Board of Health, but they failed to give assistance, neglected to report cholera cases, falsely reported them, decried sanitary measures deemed necessary. Talking about how, look, on one hand, this is definitely against the U.S., but on the other hand, it's also because they're interested in doing what the U.S. physicians term with derision mixed treatment, which is inclusion of some features of what used to be official treatment throughout most of the 19th century, like calming the patient, visiting them at their homes, applying old treatments, keeping them in familiar and reassuring environments. They were determined to keep it that way even if they had to conceal the cases from the government. Because the alternative is what they say, what did he say? The use of... What is the phrase here? Whatever Worcester may have claimed, germ warfare methods, including the use of powerful drugs, strict quarantine, and attempted cremation of the dead, all failed for various reasons. In the end, as in 1882, it was the combination of heavy rains and the growing immunity of the populace that caused the epidemic to subside, which is wild, because this book was published in 1997, and he's talking about stuff in 1882 and 1900s. And again, I don't know what to make of this, and obviously things are contextually super different, but it is very interesting to think about how Enlightenment ideas of germ theory, this, instead of trying to apply a mixed treatment, it's like we need to find the specific problem, we need to find the specific drugs to counter the specific problem, we need to attack it that way. And it's not without its uses, but it produces things that we don't even think of, medical kinds of systemic issues. Okay, let's jump back in. I was just really excited to talk about that, so that was definitely longer than a 5-minute break. But yesterday and the day and the time before, I don't think I took anything longer than a 5-minute break, so that's okay. Here we go. this is an interesting point. When the Ilustrados were making their statements about nationalism and progress, fanatical, quote-unquote, religious movements were proliferating all over the archipelago. Conventional Philippine history in valorizing the saga of the Ilustrados has ignored this parallel set of events. Where they are given ample treatment, as in works of Constantino and Strilivon, they are subjected to a classificatory scheme that includes categories such as primitive, proto-nationalist, nativist, fanatical, religious, millenarian, irrational. Wow. Oh, that's nuts. The understanding is that such phenomena are transitory in character, bound sooner or later to disappear from the modern scene. The vantage point is rationality, progress, rather than the inner logic of these movements, their plain and simple difference from familiar modern ones. We gotta understand what the fuck is going on with this Trump shit, or whatever is happening with super hyper religious fundamentalism. Instead of treating them like aberrations, if we try to understand what is actually happening, instead of labeling them in this particular way, then maybe there's something to understand about ourselves, rather than resorting to the conversations about ethical purity, which I think are also necessary, but perhaps not as much so at this very moment than what the fuck is happening? Well, this is what's happening here. No, but because specifically we got to think about non-Ilustrado movements, non-intelligentsia movements, but this is very much talking about people who articulate themselves as being Christ, Virgin Marys, other figures in the Bible. Yeah, that's weird. These gods, priestesses, and kings attracted mainly illiterate peasants, particularly those who lived in villages beyond the influence of the church Pueblo center. Among those were sugarcane workers impoverished by the price crash of the 1880s, debtors, displaced farmers, and tax or labor evaders. Many were survivors of cholera and smallpox epidemics who journeyed to pilgrimage sites in fulfillment of their vows. Some were seekers of spiritual potency, others plain vagabonds. Some associations were dominated or led by women whose access to curing powers could be greater than men's. This is very interesting. It's just like state, if you're saying fuck the state, there's something to be held there. Transcendence of provincial boundaries. That might be very interesting to use for my stuff, because Chakraborty talks a lot about provincializing Europe, and we have talked about provincializing experience, but what I'm trying to do is see, is there some way for us to understand Indian American experience specifically by reading Indian Anglophone speculative fiction in conjunction with Indian presence in speculative fiction? marginal, archaic, and undecidable in their orientation to progress and change. Understandable reasons to cast out illicit associations that Ileto is talking about. But, this is the problem. This is the fucking issue, dude. Right here he says, the movement had trouble tapping popular movements that had the appearance of the grotesque, exhibiting lopsided combinations of elements borrowed from diverse, often patently colonial sources. We gotta talk to each other. We gotta figure it out. We just have to figure it out. We cannot look at these social formations and just be like, you're a fucking asshole, you're a fucking this, you're a fucking that. We have to be able to just be like, yo man, you know what's weird? I totally understand that whatever what you're saying, where I'm coming from, it seems marginal, archaic, and undecidable, grotesque, lopsided, weirdly colonial, but it's you try to ignore or marginalize that stuff and it's still there. No more heroes. He's making that point with talking about Jose Rizal. Just no more. Yeah. Most of these bandit groups and fanatical associations participated in the liberation of Pueblo centers from Spanish control, but their support for the national revolution was inconsistent, as shown by mixed results of government efforts to tap their energies by incorporating them. This is a really fucking good book. Okay, that was awesome. I finished the fourth critique of modernity. Those essays were super useful. Started to go into the alternative sections and did like some light skimming over the unlikely correlations and stuff. And I'm like, I could continue to read this book. It's a really good book. Perhaps I shall. But I think I've gotten a lot out of it right now, and I think it would be beneficial for me to put it down and switch to something else. But before I do want to talk a little bit about, I guess like what I saw is really useful in, guys, go to your bed. Hey, go to your bed. Got my dogs in here. Whoop, whoop. But the critique of modernity section so Chakraborty talking about the very notion of time of history, times of gods, a way to kind of reconcile this kind of binary distinction between secular and the religious in a temporal sense, so that we can take the temporality of religiosity and kind of utilize it to rethink historical linearity. I Wong bringing in gender and labor politics, how this results, I think that Chakraborty talks about how it creates like Lloyd talks about in his essay how it creates like a unique topological space, this like different time, different space, different experiences of globalization. And Wong talking about gender and labor politics, this non-linear way that gender and labor politics are affected in different situations, doing like kind of a transnational study of like female factory workers, predominantly female in Southeast Asia and Central America. And I just thought that was like, it's very much connected. It draws together very tightly this notion of disrupting, even more so than binary suppositions, this notion that we have of development in this particular linear way, not just the way that we think it should be, but the way that we perceive it as having actually happened, which is not true. It's much more nonlinear, much more heterogeneous than that, which is something that like Ileto talks about in his discussion of nonlinear emplotment of Philippine history, talking about first in the medical sense, related to the cholera outbreak, and then relating that cholera outbreak, like the medical responses by state apparatuses and even the Ilustrado native intelligentsia, like they weren't doing right by the practices of the larger indigenous population, which like developed was able to create, like, I guess, like some sort of syncretics where the Filipino Spanish physicians were like doing not just formations of like Western medicine, but also things that are more reminiscent of like in conjunction with other more like indigenous or just like older Western eating practices. And then how that moves in to Saldana Portillo's discussion of the agrarian question in regards to the Sandinista agricultural policy. And it's just like all of these different places where development is taking place. You think you're about the nationalism that develops is like, hey, we're going to pull us out of this colonial bullshit and we're going to move us towards like the righteous path of history. And it really is showing how the notions of capitalism, not great. Formulations of like not Marxism but communism, because Marxism is like, even that idea that it's like a science, like the Althusserian idea that it's like, oh, it elevates so that it makes an epistemological break and it develops like a science, is so stupid to me, because I'm like, what the fuck are we talking about? It's just a critique. It's a critique of systems. We should probably not replace it with a system that is like, we probably shouldn't buy wholesale German Santa's idea that we're all marching along to the beat of like a drum that is moving us towards a particular point of development, because that point of that whole like developmental trail is just as Enlightenment dictated as as anything else. It's just weird. And that's where I found that Lloyd so weird, Dr. Lloyd's essay, like one of the most like hopeful, because it's talking about utilizing these particular forms of nationalism against the state. And again, I'm thinking about how like the Dharma, like the Ashoka Chakra, right? Okay, if I was to think about it in a temporal way that made me a Hindu nationalist, then I would be like, hey, we need to like rescue this symbol away from that calls back to this pre-colonial history. We need to continue this history towards like a great march of a Hindu nation. But that's just so funny to me, because Ashoka he converted to Buddhism after he realized that, after the Battle of Kalinga, where he realized like, oh, I really fucked up. I killed like a lot of fucking people. This was a bad idea. I'm gonna stop now. And like, I just think that's so interesting, because clearly there's something being missed there in the interpretation, because it's grafting this idea, like this symbol becomes grafted onto the idea of like a continual, like an Enlightenment notion of national development, where it's really much more about like Hinduism, with so much of its symbolic and philosophical, like with its semiotic and philosophical concepts, is constantly discussing ideas of non-duality, of non-separation, in the way that the colonial movement is in the Philippines. Spanish colonialism introduced Spanish missionaries, okay, who do all kinds of fuck shit, but also in part are comprised of individuals who work alongside the curanderos and the vaccinators of the pueblos in a way that is more interested in this kind of syncretic Western Eastern mix than the physicians employed by the state, who are not only colonial agents but also like ilustrados, like native intelligentsia, the upper crust of the native population. Same thing happens in Saldana Portillo's discussion of the Sandinista agricultural policy, where the Sandinistas' application of their Marxist-Leninist ideas without a material enough basis produced conditions that further stratified the peasantry rather than producing equality. And I'm thinking about this in relation to what's happened with, I guess, like, I'm thinking about it in so many ways, but with like the election and stuff, and the last 4 years, the last 8 years, last really like 16 years, to be honest, last like 20 something. It's just like teasing out a lot of these complicated overlaps has a lot to do with what the people in this text are doing, and that's questioning the notion of development, questioning the notion of linear development, of freedom in particular senses, all like NGOs and not, nonprofit organizations, and capital, influx of capital and lower regulations and stuff like that. Like we look at like it's so interesting that capitalism, that's like neoliberalism, right? Like capitalism folded into the ideation of liberal policy. Like, oh, we're doing this to make the world a better place. And it's like, you can be rightist, you can be leftist, you can be Marxist, you can be fascist, whatever. You could still get trapped on the wheel. That's what I think is really interesting about even the symbol of the Ashoka Chakra. Is that's why I have it tattooed on me. It's not because of any kind. It's a nationalism against the state. Like, I'm not arrogant enough to think I can break the. I want to think that we could all break the wheel together, but I'm not arrogant to think I could do it on my own. But also, I'm not so. Reducing it to questions of ethical and moral purity without considering the trajectory that we develop as a result of these semiotic and philosophical considerations seems like such a necessary but distracting from understanding the trajectory of it all. I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't even know what to think right now. That was very interesting. I'm going to move on to John Rieder now. That's the author of the other text I'm going to read. It's a PDF. And then, I don't know. Then we'll just kind of see if I want to continue going with it. Or I did see it on another, perusing dissertations on another person's bibliography from like a diss written in 2016. So it's always nice to see that overlap. It was recommended to me by a professor. That's why I'm reading it. Not because I saw it in overlapping with this. It's because my chair recommended it to me. But it was cool to see that. And I was thinking about, which one do I read next? That's going to be the one. I have a meeting with him in like 2 weeks, week and a half. And so I'm going to focus a lot more on these cosmopolitics texts that he recommended, as well as like sci-fi and kind of emergence, globalism stuff. All right, let's get going. Okay, so this is interesting. This book, I don't know if Rieder's a Victorianist, but the discussions that he's having are very Victorian literature oriented right now, in the introduction at least. And before, he's not even gotten to the text Colonialism and the Emergence of Science Fiction, but is really like outlining how Victorian anthropology, very much glossed over ideas of colonial subjugation by writing it off as like the savage's return to a prehistoric time. And so them dying is like going back to a time they're supposed to be at, which is kind of wild to think about. But is also talking about how these, let me see, what did I have as like some of the key points? Because now that I can use my Zotero instead of reading physical book. So he organizes the book around the connection between early history of the genre of English language science fiction and the history and discourses of colonialism. Talks about, begins by situating, the Copernican shift, that paradigm shift. He's like, look, paradigm shifts can occur. This particular paradigm shift places Earth no longer at the center and then becomes like, opens up the incalculable plurality of worlds. Goes on to, eventually put forth like a lot of discussions of this Victorian anthropology. People like Lewis Henry Morgan and Sigmund Freud, utilizing the notion of savagery in order to, like the trope of the savage as a remnant of the past to unite their authoritative and influential work, and then to discuss them as, their kinship structures or their sexual practices are, interpreted as being developmental stages leading to the mature sexuality of the West. So it's all about continuing the question of even development in colonial sense related to science fiction. And he's interested in figuring out how science fiction organizes the play of the fantastical and the critical when, Verne, Wells are talking about voyages under the sea and into the heavens for readers of the age of imperialism. He's saying that the otherworldliness of colonies provides a new kind of legibility and significance to an ancient plot. Colonial commerce, imperial politics turn the marvelous voyage into fantasy of appropriation, alluding to real objects and real effects that pervaded and transformed life in the homelands. And at the same time, the strange destinations of such voyages now also refer to a centuries-old project of cognitive appropriation, a reading of the exotic other that made possible, and perhaps even necessary, a rereading of oneself. So, bad stuff, good stuff, what's happening? So he talks about how, noticing the artificiality of science fiction begins to undermine the ethnographic significance, and what happens if we actively establish the positions that, what does he say? Arrange more actively the positions that establish the colonial gaze. Because in Wells, he'll do a reversal of positions that stays within the framework of the colonial gaze and the anachronism of anthropological difference, but it also highlights critical potential, specifically saying that the science fiction novel, while it's, in this particular Victorian sense, I suppose, while it's ideologically and epistemologically colonial, it exaggerates and exploits its internal divisions. So it makes stark something that is, they say the quiet parts out loud in a way that is so funny or so weird and so engaging that we have to think about it. So he talks about another Wells book, Bletzworthy, talking about how the dude basically has this really fantastical scenario, and then you find out at the end he's in a mental hospital, and it's like, hey, what's that about, right? Is he just copping out by saying it's only a dream? No, it's talking about how the fantastical construction of social orders in speculative fiction is closer to reality than normal social understandings of the world itself. And this is what's interesting. He relates it to theory in the same way that a theory pieces through appearances to depict fundamental principles or structures of interaction. So it is like when we're playing imaginaries in science fiction, we're doing there what theory does in its way. And it kind of makes more materialist through like it's an abstraction because you're imagining fantastical things, but it like coalesces that abstraction into like material, so that because when you're thinking about, you know, what happens in Dune, and you're thinking about colonial dispossession and so on and so forth, you're gonna be like, it's hard to not make those connections between what, you know, Rieder is saying here about the exaggerations that are in colonial science fiction that is informed by colonial discourse. It exaggerates things to a degree that it makes it more aware of what's happening. It's kind of like how you watch something insane like Avengers, and you're like, this is a fucking Marvel movie, and it's part of the Disney ecosystem, and it is attached to so much money and like, you know, industry prestige and monetary income and stuff like that. I don't know about prestige like Academy Awards and stuff, but I mean like as far as popularity and pay and capitalism goes. But at the same time, the exaggerations of those films, they really help us to formulate kind of theoretical, like they help us develop theoretical formulations of the world around us in a way that interrogates those very things. But that interrogation is kind of made possible by the deeply complicit nature of the thing that's being produced into the system of capitalism. You can't divorce the fact that Avengers is a Marvel movie. But does that mean that when you're not talking about civil war and you're talking about state versus individual freedoms and looking at how each can, like, they exist in like a dialectical contention with each other, is that, like, isn't that possible in that scenario because of the things that make it, the big budgets, the press tours, the attachment to the Hollywood film industry, so on and so forth? It's like, if it's part of it, you can't show cyst fractures if it's not part. I don't know. You're paying attention. It's like there's the system of colonialism. There's the fractures that develop as a result of the internal divisions, and then there's the zooming into that fracture, and then this fracture becomes your space, and then you're like, holy shit, there's a whole world in here. But I thought that it was just a fractured part of this colonial discourse, but it's not. But it is. But it's not. But it is. But it's not. Anyways, I'm gonna get a granola bar, and then I'm gonna get back into the thing. You know what? I'm just gonna keep going. Fiance's home. She asked if I wanted a plate of something. She said she's probably gonna make something. So I'm just going to get back to it. Let's go. She's the best. So nice to ask. What is going on again? Outlines of the non-linear plotment of Philippine history. Got lost. We're back. Oh my gosh. 5 minutes. Okay. This is interesting. Rieder's doing a good job of drawing me into discussing how science fiction is like one of those genres that in its emergence, in its Victorian state, excuse me, was like, at least he's talking about like Wells and Verne and stuff like that. It's like, they're obviously super entrenched in the colonial discourse, but their entrenchment does not preclude their portent for allowing us to question, I guess, like the internal tensions that develop as a result of colonial subjugation. They're actually like really useful, particularly because of their positionality, which I think is pretty cool. Because as I read this like in relation to my identity. I mean, like as an Indian American person, I'm like super imbricated in both the American and the Indian like imperial projects, neoliberal projects, in a way that makes me, like so, I don't know, it's a weird place to be, like I was thinking about, there's this person I know, a friend of my cousin I met, a few years ago, Anjal Malhotra. She wrote 2 books on partition and then one fiction book, the Book of Everlasting Things. In her, the ways that she examines partition, particularly through objects and thinking about memory and temporality and spatiality in relation to these like objects, how like they develop this, how they are remnants, right? It's kind of totemic things that contain a memory. It's very object-oriented ontology, really cool, like new materialist stuff. And I was just thinking about, like, for a second, honestly, I was just like, damn. Doing this stuff, it gets very easy to forget while I'm reading something, to be like, oh, these people are so impressive, these people are so cool. I know this person who's like so impressive and so cool. And I'm just like, I felt weird, and I went into a space, and then I had to pull myself out of that space and recall that it's not what this is about, right? Wrong instance of metonymy and metaphor, the comparative, using instead, thinking about Anjal's position as an Indian woman who traveled through, who interviewed people in India and in Pakistan and England and tracked down these objects and is discussing them. She's discussing them particularly from like the positionality of an Indian woman born and raised in India. And I'm thinking about this stuff as an Indian American man born in India, born in America, raised between India and America. And I'm thinking about what that does for the kind of imbrication of my positionality, the lack of purity that I can kind of like claim, positionally speaking, because I am like very much formed by discourses of colonialism, imperialism, neoliberalism, more so on the American front than the Indian front, just out of sheer spatio-temporal connectivity to it. But does that mean that I should be written or read naively, or that I am only capable of writing and reading naively when talking about Indian like transnationality? I don't think so. And I guess that's what makes it cool. Anyways, this is all happening. This is very exciting. 5 minutes or about 30 seconds from done. Let's like go for another 25 and then we'll just, oh my god, thank you so much, you're the best, I love you. Maybe like another 30 minutes or something? Sound good? Okay. Huh? 7? Okay. Okay, so maybe like another hour or so. We'll see. Oh, look it. I got tacos. Yes. Man, I'm so lucky. I'm so loved. All right. let's yeah. Anyways, the way the reader talks about science fiction is emerging from like a web of interconnectivity rather than like generic tendencies. And the more generic you do things, the more like creative they're able to do. Thank you so much, I love you. It reminds me that the very notion of identity itself, especially as being a South Asian American, you're just like, bro, you're in the web, dog. Like you don't get to leave the web, go somewhere else. That's where you are. And the tendencies that we operate within. I'm gonna switch chairs because Bay's not using her chair right now. Like the web that we're in cannot be escaped, and we must reckon with that if we are to contend with the shape of the wheel. Perhaps it can become a spiral. I don't know. We'll see. Anyways, let's go. Hold on one sec. I actually... Oh no. Hope that doesn't give me the strikey strike. That was only for a moment. Okay. Excuse me. Oh, okay, that's weird. The first chapter, the introduction was the first chapter. I was like wondering, what the fuck, dude? This is really long. Okay. God. That was like a really good 33 pages. Fuck. It's like absurd to me that I'm gonna have to, like, it's just so tight. Like, it's crazy. Unbelievable. points. Okie dokie. Nice. Alright. Damn, that sun is in my eye. I'm gonna close that really quick. Okay. Alright. 5-minute break. Then a last 25-minute run, and then I think I'm going to be good for this evening. Then my fiance and I are going to practice dancing, and then we're probably going to go play some pool. Okay, John Rieder, he's making a lot of really interesting, it's a combination of Marxist analysis, post-colonial analysis, well, I guess like analysis of colonialism, not really post-colonial. I have a professor, Dr. Rangarajan, who'd be really interested in the kind of things that he's talking about time period-wise, because she's kind of interested in that and what's happening in India during that time. But Rieder makes, it's just a really interesting argument. So the first chapter is focused on the colonial gaze, the imbrication within the colonial gaze of science fiction, and the capacity of, and the pervasiveness of ideologies of colonialism, that, this proto-narrative of progress pervading ideologies of colonialism that code the non-European world in all its diversity, not simply as the other, but in various ways as the veritable embodiment of the past, meaning like their European past. And so, like, folding all non-Western society into Western society in the trajectory of development that, interestingly enough, is outlined in Politics of Culture and The Shadow of Capital. And that's the proto-narrative, it seems, is like the notion of development in a straight line. And this is, the kind of adherence. Well, that's like one thing that comes up, but like what Rieder is predominantly talking about is how these, like, there's a pervasive colonialism to, there's pervasive ideological formations all over science fiction. He talks about how colonialism affects that how it projects this pervasive ideology of progress, how it is very much related to class issues, labor issues during the time period that produce certain conditions that, allowed a reading audience to come into shape. That might be something that would be interesting to think about in terms of speculative fiction, like Indian American readers of Indian Anglophone speculative fiction. What is that? There's like a cultivation of like a new reading space, or an expansion of the reading space. What is that? What are the conditions under which that emerges? It would connect to Appadurai's ideas of like mass migration and technological innovation that produces what Said calls like the exilic condition, the removal from like a sense of home. This is very much like a part of Anchal's book, like Malhotra's book, The Remnants of Partition, like the objects as being like disjointed and thus like moving around in space. Kind of reminds me of like Tropic of Orange, where the orange moves and space moves with it. But he talks about the lost race motif, the trope of the lost race in science fiction, how that serves to kind of reify ideations of the lost race into like a particular distinction with like the race that is not lost, white. So what does he say specifically? Two major strains: utopian and satiric traditions, and commercially and successful numerically predominant strain of lost race fiction, with an internal conflict that their coming helps to solve. And just talking about how those, even those particular types of like when you encounter the lost race, they become a formation that allows Western hierarchies to continue to propagate. It folds them into this unifying history. It's like they're defined in their relationship to the West. Yeah, I don't know. This is really cool. Just discussing the various ways, even in genre, system, and text, like the difficulty in defining what exactly science fiction is and how to talk about colonialism in distinction from imperialism, which is a point that he makes about India, which I think is interesting. He makes the point that, India was experienced not, or he makes the distinction that in his estimation that India experienced not colonialism but imperialism because of the colonial outposts of Europe, of Britain, instantiating in the figure of the Raj. It's like where is the exact, because at a certain point he talks about how, like, look, we need to define science fiction, its emergence, and colonialism before we get into this conversation, because otherwise we're not going to be like really getting into it like that. Damn, I can't quite find it. But he makes that distinction between colonialism and imperialism, and then talks about how science fiction exists as a... He says the emergence of science fiction is a long winding path leading from certain narratives that carefully disrupt realist conventions in the mid to late 19th century to ones that assume science fiction conventions in the 1930s. Talking about how it's a web of resemblances that can be traced backwards from Gernsback's baptism of the genre, as he says, along a variety of paths, and can be extended in unpredictable number of new and different ways. So it's literally, any literary text can be read as a similar kind of project. He says that citation, imitation, allusion perform some kind of position, so the pressures on the market, dynamics of prestige, and construction of genealogies are intrinsic features of the web of resemblances that constitute a genre. But it's only like intertextual repetition can accumulate into a family of resemblances, he says. You can have stuff, like the very notion of a founding instance or origin of a genre is self-contradictory, he says, because the work in question is in an important way not an example of the genre it establishes, but a peculiarly influential violation of some pre-existing set of generic expectations. So the way that science fiction exists in this like way that traces paths of various commonplace devices, identifying instantly reiterated patterns, interpret them as cosmetic solutions to real social contradictions. Cosmetic solutions to real social contradictions is the thing, right? They're places of imaginary impossibility where like the problems are not going to get fixed or really addressed because they're so, in order to tell the story, they're like so folded into these ways of colonialism. And even when it can be disrupted, the colonial gaze can be freaked out by a kind of a change of perspective to center those viewing the colonial subjugation. It still exists within a relationship to colonialism and thus can never be divorced from it as such. And I don't know, it's just like it's just weird. It's just really interesting. That's just where I'm at. Honestly, I'm kind of fried now. So I think that I'm going to, no, you know what? Let's just keep going. We're at chapter 2. Let's just keep going with chapter 2 and let's just see where it is. What we know is that colonialism is inextricable from science fiction. It just is. Because science fiction, the way that it talks about imaginary worlds was imaginaries produced in relationship to colonialism and thus folded into the logic of coloniality. And what I'm wondering is how Indian Anglophone speculative fiction definitely exists in relationship to this stuff, because again, like, you can't not, right? But in what ways does it plot a new set of representations, potentially, for I don't even really know yet right now where for what. But yeah, it's definitely in relationship to the Indian Anglophone identity. Do I even want to say Anglophone? Am I speaking specifically American? I don't know. This is all gonna like change and fluid. It's all fluid. You know, it's week one. We're doing our best. All right, 25 minutes on the clock. Let's go. Nice. Oh my gosh. 9 more minutes. Fading a little. That's okay. That's okay. Lapidary. Okay, that is the end of today's session. I am fried. I am genuinely excited to be done right now. Almost 4 hours. Good shit today. Finished the valuable sections that I got out of Politics of Culture and the Shadow of Capital, mainly focused on the first part of it, and the first 200 out of 600 pages or something. Those essays were like really helpful because they're all focused on critique of modernity. Those are going to be useful for my considerations of Indian science fiction's place in the modern global literary marketplace. And yeah, it was cool. It was super useful. Reader's book. I'm going to say Reader. Reader's book is going really well. I really enjoy it. It is basically just like an awesome survey of all of these, right now at least, as far as the colonial gaze chapter and the second chapter that was focused on, what was it titled again? Fantasies of appropriation. So different tropes and how they appear in the genre of like Lost World science fiction. How these different tropes, whether it's what are some of the ones that he brought up? Was like the Civil War trope, the princess, the anachronistic existence of prehistory with advanced technology, like how all of these factor into a narrative of colonial appropriation, either ontologically speaking, like folding them into like a sense of colonial being as part of like the larger narrative of the explorers or adventurers in the stories, or as what was I saying? The colonial, their instantiations of the colonial. God damn it, I don't even know. This is what happens when you do it high. The ideas are definitely in there. The notes are being taken. The talking's happening. I've been doing it for a couple of hours. I'm tired. Be gentle with me. All right. Thanks so much for being a part of this journey. Thanks for watching the chronicling of my slow and steady spiral. Whether it's upward or downward is not material. It's not about directionality necessarily, because it could be, cross-spatial, cross-temporal, heterogeneous. Spiral moves. I'm not trying to be in the wheel. I'm trying to move around in a circle to different levels. And wherever they are, I'm just trying to get there. All right. Anyways, thanks for watching. Much love. I'll see you later.